Warning! The following program is solely intended for a mature audience. Any of the idiotic opinions and views expressed on this show are solely opinions of Dark Fringe Radio and not of its advertisers, which is completely pointless because this poorly produced, dumbass podcast has no advertisers. Furthermore, any rebroadcast or redistribution of Dark Fringe Radio podcasts without the permission is strictly prohibited. If you do, we will find you. And then we will send 3 black-eyed children to your home or office to collect your soul. Thank you. Enjoy the show.
Coming to you live from the Mistopheles Studios, it's Dark Fringe Radio. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining in on Dark Fringe Radio today, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight is episode 41, and today we have a very special guest with us on the line, and his name is Bernie Taylor, and he's an author of a book called Before Orion, and we're going to be getting into the book and talking about the collective unconscious. It's it's a theory that was brought on by Carl Jung, for some of that you may know or may not know, and it has to do with a lot. That's the main premise of the book in a way, because what Bernie did with this particular book was he was able to put together a collection of different depictions of art throughout the world. Basically confirming the collective unconscious, and it's a very fascinating book. I urge everybody to go check out his website at beforeorion.com and check out his books. He's also has some other books prior to this as well, but tonight we'll be talking to him about that. I wanted to remind everybody about how you can follow us on social media. There's a couple different ways. We're available on Facebook, also Twitter and Instagram. And also YouTube. So please make sure you go to all those avenues, especially YouTube. Subscribe to the channel so anytime a new episode comes out, you get the notification right away, and boom, you can watch your episode whenever you want. So please make sure to follow us there. And how to listen to the podcast, very simple. There's a few different ways. You can check us out on iTunes if you have an iPhone. We're also available on Google Play, Google Music. Just look up Dark Fringe Radio in the podcast section, and also SoundCloud. Another one that's not listed here, but I want to also mention is Player FM, which is also another platform that kind of collects a bunch of different types of podcasts and compiles them onto one website. It's a very cool site, so if you guys have never checked it out, check that one out because it has a plethora of different type of podcasts. So if you like a lot of different things, it's a really good platform for you guys to check out. So, but if you go to any one of those, please make sure you subscribe to our channel. You give us a 5-star rating if you're doing the iTunes. Please do that. It's super important that you do that for the podcast. That's how we are able to continue doing this for you guys. So I'm going to be getting into our interview here in a moment with Bernie Taylor. So again, I want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, anything, suggestions for the show, you can send that to me directly at thedarkfringe@gmail.com. Again, that's thedarkfringe@gmail.com. So listen, a very interesting conversation I had with Bernie. I hope you guys enjoy it. I really do believe that you guys will. We're going to get into that here in a second. So I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining in on the podcast tonight at Dark Fringe Radio. Tonight we have a very special guest. His name is Bernie Taylor, and he is the author of a book called Before Orion. And we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject regarding the... basically, it's called the collective unconscious, and it's a topic we've kind of talked about indirectly, but really not directly. But we're going to get into all that and talk about his book and what he's is depicting in all these stories and pictures that he's basically compiled which is very fascinating, by the way. If you guys have a chance to, pick up this book, please, I urge you. Look at his website, beforeorion.com. You can also find it in also Amazon and all those other retailer stores that you could pick this up. But it's just a fascinating book. It has a lot of great stories and pictures to go along with it. So again, I wanted to welcome again Bernie Taylor, author of Before Orion. How are you tonight?
Hey, great. Well, we might hear some thunder tonight.
That's
So
great.
we'll listen in on a little showers going on here in Oregon.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, listen, thanks for taking the time to speak to me tonight. And this is a fascinating subject. Just before we went live here, I told you that I've really not gotten into the subject, but you rebutted and refuted that I have. And you're actually right, because, after, talking to you initially and then looking into the subject matter, I actually kind of understand what you're talking about.
We're going to talk tonight about every monster there ever was, every dream we've ever had, and every myth that from around the world, because it all goes to the same place. And that is our program today.
That's wonderful. And again, it's the theory is the collective unconscious, and it's a theory that was made famous by Carl Jung, and of course he's the famous, I believe, philosophist. And it's quite interesting that you were able to compile all this information, all these pictures, and really make a different, a correlation to how we kind of repeat the same mythos in our lives, the same kind of constructs, whether it be like you've depicted very thoroughly in this book, the hero theory. It's interesting how, there's other theories out there that are fantastically famous out there, of course. Like you talk about the ancient alien theory, and of course the lost civilization theory, so on and so forth. But those have been commercialized to exhaustion. But this is actually something that's very interesting because it makes perfect sense. It's the perfect explanation to why we have these certain constructs in our life.
Will, you and I have had this conversation before. Deep in our DNA, back in ancient Greece, there was somebody who questioned. I came to the temple, and someone asked me from the higher ground the same questions that you're asking me, and they're posing the same problems, and they're saying, maybe you got a pretty good idea there, and the only difference is we're over the airwaves. We're not at a temple. We're not wearing togas. And we're not drinking wine. At least I'm not drinking wine. I'm drinking water. The costumes and the sets change, but the story remains the same.
Yes, and that's the important part. And yes, we're not in togas, and we're not in pyramids, and we're not in ancient Rome, but we have the power of the airwaves and being able to spread this message. Because, quite frankly, I think this is one of the most common sense explanations of our history that it just fits. It doesn't have to. You don't have to go to fantastical corners or vast universes to make this work.
You just realized you were just disinvited from contacting the desert for the rest of your life.
Probably, right?
You were just blackballed. That was it. You're done.
Hey, listen, I have to explore all avenues. That's my thing. And, I tell everybody that starts to become aware and a little bit questionable about what they've been taught in, our society through education and whatever the case may be. They start to question things, and they start to research information and where the sources come from and so on and so forth. And I think that's important. But, this is, again, like I'm saying, it just makes sense what you're talking about here with this book. And I've been able to go through it very, little, because just at the time that I was able to get it and actually speak to you, but I was able to peruse a lot of it. And it makes a lot of sense. I see exactly what you're talking about. Now, talking about the conscious, the collective unconscious, a lot of people don't know what the hell I'm talking about when I say that. I didn't even know.
So,
you know what I mean?
Let me give a little primer on that.
Please.
Okay. So we're going to go to the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, who came up with this idea of the collective unconscious. And Jung believed that there are symbols and archetypes within our memory that pass on from one generation to the next they're deep within us that we don't even think about. So if you see a mother and her breastfeeding her child, you recognize that it's a mother-daughter relationship. If you see an old man and a young boy, you recognize that it's a teacher. There's a mentor and a apprentice of sorts. If you see a bull storm into your kitchen, you recognize its danger. No one has to tell you to do that. So Jung looked at the dreams of many thousands of people, and he found that there's common symbols or archetypal characters. And on the non-organic side, the two most common are the mountain, the cosmic mountain, and then the river of transformation. And then among animals, people dream about horses, elephants, snakes, bears, and so on. But they don't dream about hippopotamuses, and they don't dream about wombats, and they dream about bats. They dream about the same animals. And so Jung said that we carry these dreams in us somehow, and he called that the collective unconscious. And when the story, if you're looking out your window and there's a blue jay who's feeding her young, she's brought worms back, and a big crow comes in to steal those worms. Right away, you think the crow is the villain. No one had to teach you that crow was the villain. Okay. But it's somehow in your conscious that you recognize that. And you recognize that bluebird who's feeding the young. It's a mother feeding her child, her offspring. So we have these archetypes within us. And when the archetype is encountered, the stories evoke. And then maybe an owl flies by and scares off the crow. And so that owl became the hero. So we can find these stories naturally within ourselves, and they go back to a very distant time. And I believe they actually go back to a time when we were, walking on all fours, that we were a different animal, because just that blue jay recognizes that the crow was danger and that she needs to feed her young, and the owl recognizes that what the crow was doing, maybe didn't know it was wrong, but he recognized that he was being an intruder. And so these archetypal characters, the old and the young, the mother and the child, the hero, the damsel in distress, and the villain, they're in us, but they're in us from a very distant point in time, and perhaps when we were on fours.
Yeah, that makes.
And I don't mean four as babies. I mean
four as cavemen,
pre-chips.
No, I get it. I totally get it. And it's funny because I was cooking dinner tonight, and I was watching my daughter at the same time, and she was watching Shrek, the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very old school archetype, of course, right at the beginning, towards the middle of the movie, of him having to go save the princess in the castle from the dragon, right? Mm-hmm. And as soon as that came on, and I'm like thinking to myself, and I'm thinking about this interview tonight at the same time, and I'm like, holy shit. Like, bang, like, it just, like, a light bulb went off again. I'm like, look, this is the same story. This is exactly what we're talking about.
It's the same story. It's because we tell these stories through archetypes, because that's how we can understand them. Someday aliens might visit us, and they'll have a story without archetypes. It's just something different. They may have a story that's backwards. And we're like, what the heck? We have no idea what you're trying to explain. But through the standard progression of the story, the hero goes on a journey. He encounters danger. He faces his fears of the danger. He overcomes them, saves the damsel in distress, returns home, and on that journey he meets friends. He has a mentor, some sort of wizard, Obi-Wan or Yoda or whoever, the witch from the east.
Yes.
Whatever that mentor is that gives help. He needs that he believes that he needs that, but ultimately he really has to face his own fears. But we tell that story everywhere. There's really funnily two stories out there. The hero goes on a journey, or the stranger enters a room. And then everything else is some mix of that.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because a stranger entering the room, that's so vague. That could be at any point, right? I mean, that's anything. That's the genesis and that's the origin of all, right? You really think about it.
These are the two key, and of course could be the hero that enters the room, so it makes the circle. But we have these two fundamental stories that we tell, and we have archetypal characters: the hero, the villain, the damsel in distress, and what was that movie last year, that the creature from the Black Lagoon movie that won all the awards?
Yeah, it was. I think it was called something of water. The Shape of Water.
Yes, The Shape of Water.
Yes.
Which is interesting that the damsel in distress is the so-called monster. And the female character becomes the hero.
Yes.
So as a social construct, we can switch them around. So she saves the so-called monster, but the monster is really the government man who's trying to kill off the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Of course, yeah.
And so we switch them around. The Disney story of Moana, she becomes the hero on a journey as opposed to Hercules.
Yeah.
And so we change this, whether the hero is male or female, the person in distress is male or female, is a social construct. We fundamentally tell the same stories. And we can go back in time to 34,000 years ago to a cave painting, actually not a cave engraving, in Spain. And there's this panel 10 meters across, streaming across with dots. And these red discs are about the size of your palm. And if you look beyond those red discs, you can find characters. And in those characters, we can see the hero taking this journey. And he encounters animals on the way, and he harnesses the strengths of those animals, whether it be the eagle, the horse, the dolphin, the seal, the lion, the giraffes, and so on. And he goes on this journey, and he actually encounters a damsel in distress. She's a redheaded woman, and she doesn't look very happy. And then he goes to the other end of the panel, and he spins around, and he encounters the Barbary ape and the lion and the bears. I'm looking in my mind right now. The now extinct great auk, and then there's a dragon. It's actually a crocodile, which was later interpreted as a dragon.
Right. And
so we have all the characters of St. George the Dragon Slayer. But we have all the characters in myths throughout the world. We have this hero that goes on his journey, and we can see the expressions in these characters. This female character with braided red hair, she is obviously in distress, and the artist 34,000 years ago had the ability to capture that. And this hero on this journey holds a club, and he stands at the top of the bottom of the panel. It's really the top of the panel, and he's holding the club in victory. And around his neck, he has a red pelt made from these red discs. So he has clubbed something, he killed something that had those pelt, that had a molted or red pelt that he now wraps around his head as the victor. So this story goes back, this fundamental story of the hero's journey and the damsel and the archetypes. It goes back such a deep in time, and it asks us the question. Are we really inventing anything in our minds other than microchips and more trouble?
That's exactly what I thought. That's one of the first thoughts that came to my mind. I'm like, are we just replaying a record over and over again, thinking that we're recreating or we're creating something that in reality that we really didn't? We're just putting the record back on the record player again.
We're just spinning the wheel. Of course, Ecclesiastes is attributed to Solomon that there's all things that have been done before will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
And we're repeating Solomon right now. Okay.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
So the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Babylonians, they had been to these caves because there's key characters in the stories that they tell.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed. There's there's always that one key character that kind of follows every other story in every area. Is that correct?
Correct. There's actually a unique story. So we could actually see the Giza Sphinx in this panel. And it's exactly, so the Giza Sphinx has the head of a human with the body of a lion. And in this particular case, it's actually the lion, the complete lion, and then the face kind of pops out the top. But it is this exact same. So we can tie that to the Egyptians. We have probably about 20 Greek constellations, which we can tie to the Ptolemy, so to the Greeks. We can go around this panel. We can find these unique characters. Among the Tuareg people of the Sahara, there's a very unique story about a woman, a man hero, and an elephant. That's very explicit, and it's something no one else has this story. And so people had been to these caves, and they looked at them, and they said, oh my God, we can't do this. There's nothing in our history that could do this. We don't know if anybody else can do this. The Greeks said the Romans couldn't certainly do this. And they knew the Egyptians couldn't do it because it wasn't in their own art. And so they asked themselves, well, who did this? And so the Egyptians thought, the Greeks, and the Romans, and so on, they all thought that they were the smartest of their time. That there is an evolution of thinking, of thought, and that they were just building on primitive people from the past, just as people believe today. But in fact, we don't. So these ancient people had been to the cave, and they looked at these images that were well beyond anything they could do. What do you think what story did they come up with?
Probably the biblical one, maybe, I'm thinking.
Well, they came up with, first of all, they said, these people are lost.
Right.
So we don't know these people. We didn't do this. So this is, number one, this is some sort of a lost civilization.
Right. Okay. Yes.
This is knowledge that we don't have, we no longer have, which is really what we still tell today.
Yes.
Picasso visited the Altamira cave shortly after 1900 because they said that it was a forgery, it was a fake, because primitive man could not have made those images in the Altamira cave. Picasso walked out and said that none of us in our modern time could have done this. This is not a forgery. This is the real deal. This is knowledge of art that precedes our time. And then Picasso takes specific characters from the Altamira cave and he uses them in his first work of Cubism, Les Dames d'Avignon. He puts these masks from Altamira cave, these masks of the horses, and he puts them on two female characters in a brothel. And so he transfers the female mare metaphor to his own artwork. And when Picasso came out with that painting, people said, this is horrendous, this is horrible. One day we're going to find Picasso has hung himself behind his great canvas. And but Picasso stuck with it. And he continued to borrow metaphorical images as they exactly were in the caves. So in our modern time, we think of modern art, as something we created that comes from Picasso, but we really didn't do it. He borrowed from the past. So this is what I think happened. So there's a lot of Atlanteans out there, and I believe that the ancient Greeks, the Romans, and so forth, they went to this cave and they looked at this and they said, oh my God, this is a lost civilization. This is something we can't do. So then they came up with stories about how they were lost, because the images don't say how they're lost. And so, at that time, why they could be lost? Well, the gods, right? Floods, lightning. Now the new one is comets, right? Comets and asteroids.
Right.
And something happened in the night skies that caused this civilization to disappear, and that's why we no longer have them. And I believe that's where that story of the Atlanteans come from. Originally comes from that they saw these images and they said, well, what the heck? And the same thing with Picasso. But Picasso didn't say it was a lot, they were whisked away by aliens or,
right.
The floods washed them away. Picasso just said, we can't do this, but I'm going to learn from this. And Picasso died a very wealthy man, and he is by far the most top 5 artists of all times, and certainly the top modern artist.
Yeah.
So that we believe is a modern artist.
Right, and that's what's so interesting, because it begs another question, because from what you just said, from his his quote stating that he doesn't think this was even from that even our time or his time could have been recreated. So it really throws the history narrative or the timeline really off track, because I really don't think that we have a really good understanding of how long things happened, as far as timeline goes. I don't really think we have a really good understanding of that. I think that's another, point in evidence towards that. But getting away from that, I wanted to ask you, what got you into this? I mean, from you to compile all this information, look at all this, and, and put all these pieces together, what interested you in, in this, this whole idea of the, conscious,
I fell in it. Okay, so I stepped in it.
Please.
And I wrote a previous book, Biological Time, which is a scientific work, and it's about how animals and plants time themselves. Now, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and we have salmon. And every year, the salmon are earlier or later every year, they're earlier or later. And so the salmon might come up in, September, early September this year, and last year they're late September. But they all early later together. So it's either, out in the ocean, they're all following one smart salmon who tells time, or there's some other mechanism. So I studied the question, and I borrowed Fish and Wildlife data. I looked at the endocrinology, the chemistry within the salmon, and studied biological clocks and so on. And I actually came up with how it works, and it's pretty damn simple. I can say damn. I hope I can say damn on your program.
You're
That's
fine.
about as far as I
You're
go.
fine. You're in good company here.
If you go to Alaska during the summertime, you get off the airplane, and if it's in the evening, it's still light. And you don't get sleepy because it's the darkness that makes you sleepy. And so you might go for 2 days being up and out, about, and oh my God, this is just so wonderful. I can get so much more done. You go fishing, hunting, berry picking, whatever it is. And eventually you're going to crash. But with humans, it's the light that keeps us awake and the darkness that puts us to sleep, which is just the opposite with the salmon. The light slows down the salmon, and the darkness speeds them up. Okay, so they move around to avoid predators, bears, and things like that. Okay, and so what happens is that if they migrate during the darkness, every night has a different level of darkness. If you have a full moon, it's not really dark for the salmon, and so around the full moon period, they actually stop migrating. And so you have during the dark moon, around the dark of the moon, you have a lot of migration. Well, the moon is out of sync with the sun. The moon is 29.5 days times 12 is 11 days short of 365. So the new moon, let's call it the big migration moon, the new moon, will be January 12th one year. Well, the next year it's going to be January 1st.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And so the reason why the salmon are early later for one year or the next is because they're following a solar lunar calendar. And there's a wealth of information out there in the primary literature that explores all these different animals that people had seen. One point of birds migrate, waterfowl migrates more prolifically during the dark of the moon. And what they didn't realize was, well, the moon's out of sync with the sun. That's why the migrations are early later for one year next. I went down the food chain all the way to the invertebrates. So everything that bites you, right. They're doing this, have the same rhythms. And then I looked at this concept and I said, well, someone must have known this. And I looked at calendars of ancient peoples as well as hunter-gatherers. And their entire calendar, their lunar calendars about where and when they're going to find plants and animals. And so that Native Americans couldn't wait by the river for the salmon to come because they would have heavy food. So they knew to be there at that time. And each following the salmon, there was some other biological event that was lunar time that they continued on with. And then I said, well, if Native Americans had this down their calendars, maybe it's in the cave art in Europe. And I looked at an image of, images of the Lascaux cave from 17,000 years ago in France. And they have the same nomenclature and the same physiology or characteristics that the Native Americans had in their own calendars. So you could look at you got a big running megaloceros like an elk, and it's a huge rack, and it's blowing steam, and its head is up. It's rutting. That's what it's doing. It's not a springtime or summertime scene because he wouldn't have this big rack, and you can see the steam coming out of his mouth, which say it's a colder time of year. And under him, he has 13 dots. And you count 13 dots to a box. And how it works is, if you count 13 from the new moon, you're actually at the full moon. The full moon becomes a box. Mm-hmm. And then what they did was, they used consecutive boxes to count full moons. So some animals will have a bunch of actual boxes underneath them with a mark in the middle that will tell them whatever that biological event was in the year. So they fundamentally had the same calendars as Native Americans because the animals hadn't changed, the sun and moon hadn't changed, and people hadn't changed. And so that was about 13 years ago, and I gave lots of presentations to scientific groups, and I wrote some articles and so on, and I was way ahead of my time. So I said, I'm going to put this on the shelf for 10 years, and I'm going to come back to it and take a look if something else pops up. And I went back into doing the same chronobiology stuff, and then I saw something in this gallery disc, and it was an elephant. And it was like, whoa. Why is there an elephant in Spanish art? And I asked a friend of mine, George Schaller, who's the foremost wildlife biologist. He's a mentor of everybody, including Jane Goodall. It was George that said to Jane that you look for the eating of meat, consuming of meat, and tool making, which were the two big ones that Jane Goodall ultimately found and made her famous. And George worked with me, and we recognized, well, that elephant, there were elephants in Europe at that time. Didn't really look at that like that one. And then George and I went through over a year and a half back and forth with emails. We identified a whole bunch of other animals, and one was a giraffe, another giraffe and her young. And there were no giraffes in Europe at that time. And so what happened was the person had been to Africa. So we have this person, this artist, who travels from Spain to Africa and back again. So we have a journey. And then we actually have two characters of an old man whispering to the ear of a young boy. So again, we have those archetypes of the storytelling. And on this panel, we have the damsel in distress. She's over on the end of the giraffes. And all these characters start to fill in. And of course, we know of Joseph Campbell as the hero's. Speaking of the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell had visited some of the caves, and he walked out and he said, they're all myths. And I read Joseph, what Campbell had said. I said, that's bunk, because they're not all myths. Because I do this chronobiology work, and they're not all myths. And he had nothing to actually show that they were myths, other than that he believed everything was a myth and a metaphor that became a myth. And well, it actually turns out that Campbell was right. He didn't know that he was right. He didn't have a good explanation for he was right. But all these characters on the panel are actually archetypal characters that they're all metaphors as well, and they contribute to a myth. And throughout these caves in Europe, we have these common characters. And so Campbell was right, but not, he just winged it, right?
Yeah. He thought he was right, but he wasn't right about what he thought.
He wasn't right about his story. And so we're gonna give Joseph Campbell an A- on this. Okay?
Well, listen, I mean, he tried. Like you can't, he tried. But listen, you talk about all these caves and you talk about all these depictions, and it's quite interesting that the same story is being told continent to continent. So you're talking about South America. That I saw that some caves in South America that had the same depictions as some in Africa, and the same thing in Asia as well. It's just to me. Is there a point of origin where all these?
Yes.
Okay, so there is.
Now there's something I never talk about the last chapter of the book.
Okay, that's fair.
If you've gone that far, I'm not going to talk about it. Okay, but I will talk about the point of origin. Okay, the point of origin is in Western North Africa, at least 300,000 years ago. Okay, and 300,000 years, about a year ago, maybe it was a year and a half ago, there was a find at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, and they dated the fossils of modern man to 300,000 years ago, and it completely blew no one was expecting this. Before that, we were going to Ethiopia 180,000 years ago,
right?
But we pushed it back so far in a part of Africa nobody was looking. But it is exactly the place in Africa where this Paleolithic artist goes to, because some of the animals that are in the image aren't just African animals; they're Western North African animals, and one of them is the Barbary ape. It's distinctive to West North Africa. There's also two dogs. In these images that are distinctive to Western North Africa. One is the canary dog, and the other is the Tuareg Slohi, or the Aswan.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a journey of a person who goes to West North Africa. He's not going around to Egypt, and he's not going to Ethiopia and all that sort of stuff. And he swims across. We can actually see him swimming. He swims across the Strait of Gibraltar with the dolphins, and the crabs on the shoreline, as well as the seal. And so the point of origin is at least 300,000 years ago in Western North Africa. And it's in a story that everybody's heard. Huh. Absolutely everybody in Western civilization has heard this story. And it's the story of Hercules. And this character is the Greek Hercules that we find in this panel. And that we find him on two ends. And he's the hero on this journey. On one end, we have the character of Hercules. Then we have the eagle, which is Aegea, the constellation Aegea. We have the horse, it's Pegasus. The dolphins become Pisces. The the seal becomes Cetus, the sea monster, and then the man at the other end is Orion, and above him is we've got the lion, which is Leo. The bears are Ursa Major. The great auk is Cygnus. Above the great auk is the crocodile, which becomes Draco, constellation Draco.
Right.
And so it's the story of Hercules, and Hercules travels to West North Africa, and he goes to a place, and on one of his later journeys, and it's the story. The ancient Greeks told us the story, and it's in the artwork, and it's undeniable because there's specific geographic markers, not just the animals that are indigenous to that area, but there's geographic markers that show exactly where this place is. And it's so we have not only do we have these archetypal characters now, myths, but we have the actual myths that people told 34,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Because the Greeks and others, they saw them and they figured out the geography, and then they put the stories together. Now the 34,000 years old story, it's probably slightly different than how the Greeks told the story of Hercules, and the Tuareg told of Mercury and the elephant, and the Egyptian told of the Great Sphinx, but they're a compilation of them, and we can follow those myths to see how they interpreted as things happened.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'm looking into all this, and it's just amazing the work that you must have put into getting all these pictures into this book. I mean, that's what one of the biggest parts of this book that impressed me. I mean, you were able to put all these photographic evidence together and compile it. One thing I wanted to ask you: do you think now, we're talking about how we can get all this information, with technology and things are information's at our fingertip. Basically, do you think this is something that's been more talked about now, or do you think it's more hidden now that technology has, moved on to where it is now?
What do you mean by what specifically is hidden?
Just the idea of this thought,
Oh, okay. That's good. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, one would have had to gone through Time or Newsweek or something like that to have a story out like this. But we have a democratization of the media, and I've been on a number of podcasts, and I'm over 2 million people on podcasts. I can count up the shows that have listened to this story for at least 1 hour.
Wow.
So the journals of Nature and Science each have about 300 readers per issue, 300,000 readers per issue. So I have surpassed Science and Nature, and those readers are looking at a few paragraphs, right? Blips. They don't read the articles.
Yeah.
So I'm at over 2 million people that have heard this story since last January.
Amazing.
This past January.
Amazing.
And it could easily go into the tens of thousands. You hit a Joe Rogan, tens of millions. Joe Rogan is 10 million or something. Right. Yeah. So it's pretty. As you move into different spaces, there's but it doesn't matter. How I see it is, it doesn't matter if it's 2 million or 100 million. It's that how does it affect each individual that hears the story?
Yes.
What do they personally get out of it? So if I change the hearts and minds of one person, it's more important than a million people listen to me on a podcast, because it changes lives, and because it takes us deep into our psyche, and we have to face this elephant in the room, that there were people that were smarter before us, and that were retelling. They recognized that they themselves were retelling stories from the past that we're continuing to tell. And that all this drama that we have in our lives, in Washington, in North Korea, and so forth, all these villains have played their parts before, and they're going to play their parts again. Right. And there will always be the hero who saves the damsel in distress, and that it's all going to work out. But there will be dark times, and there will be light times. and we all just, bear through it. Stay true to who you are, and you will, persevere, and you will live on, and your offspring. Um, and so, do not be in despair of the last 2.5 years.
I feel like I'm in detention, like permanent detention right now. But yeah, yeah. But it's interesting because we still see examples of this in everyday life. I mean, we see it in movies, we see it in TV, we see it in the news. We see it basically in every aspect of our lives. Even if you're like a MMA fan, for instance, they always paint one fighter as the hero and the other fighter as the villain. That's been told on and on and on and on and on and on and on again. Like you've eloquently said. Do you think this is a question that came into my mind because I really started to really get into it when you really posed this whole new spectrum of thinking on me. Do you think this collective unconscious, do you think it's maybe the root of modern religion?
So I'm going to give a definition of religion given by Eckhart Tolle,
Okay.
The Power of Now. And Tolle says that the religious man is following the spiritual belief of another person, whereas the spiritual person has their own experience.
Right.
Okay. So if we start looking at religions, and this is really a Joseph Campbell thing. And Joseph Campbell looked at all the major religious characters in Jesus, Muhammad, and so on, and he said that they tell the same story of the hero's journey. From the fundamental story structure, the answer is yes. But we can also actually look into the religious characters, especially archetypal characters, and we can look at the angel. The angel we find throughout around the world. There is the Birdman, which is the angel. We find it in Horus among the ancient Egyptians. We have it in the Anunnaki, have it in their person. The Birdman. We find it Native Americans put on the garbs of the birds to speak to address the spirit world, to commune with the spirit world. This bird character is absolutely freaking everywhere, and it's also throughout the Abrahamic religions. And so the archetypal characters such as the angel go back to a distant point of time, and we can actually see this man transform himself into a bird. We can see it at Lascaux in the Shaft of the Dead Man. We can see it in this gallery disc of the El Castillo cave. And I showed that he transforms into the shaman who has a vulture mask in another cave. And so we can see this transformation, and so the angel is the intermediary between the earthly and the spirit, the heavenly spirit worlds, and that's the same as Horus and these characters. So the characters in our modern religions go way back in time. Now, there's another important character too. It's the mountain. It's the cosmic mountain, and you can go through every religion around the world. They either have a cosmic mountain that the hero has climbed. Moses. Jesus was Mount Sinai. Jesus was transfigured on Mount Tabor. Hercules climbed Jebel Tobakal, which we now call Mount Atlas in mythology, which is a real place. We can go around the world and find the shamans climbing the mountains. And wherever we don't have a mountain, where there's a flat piece of land, we built them. We built the Giza pyramids. We created mountains. And then on the Mayans created mountains on the flat areas of Mexico. And so there's something deep inside of us that draws us to climb the mountains. And if you're like in actually elementary art class and they ask you to draw a scene, you're probably going to draw a river in the front and a mountain in the back, and maybe a tree.
That's true.
Okay, it's just a thing. Why are we drawn to do that? And I love that scene in Close Encounter of the Third Kind, where Richard Dreyfuss, he can't sleep and he has this dream of the mountain, and he builds the Devil's Tower in his living room out of mud. And there's other people that have been taken, and they show that the little boy, he had been drawing pictures of mountains over and over and over, and the same mountain.
Right.
And it's fascinating that Steven Spielberg, or his writer, had picked up that cosmic mountain myth that's inside of us. And what's really interesting about that cosmic mountain, Devil's Tower, that's Bear Lodge among the Lakota Sioux. And the Lakota Sioux historically have a religious migration through the spring. And it ends at the summer solstice, and it ends at Devil's Tower, Bear Lodge. And that's where they have their Sundance Festival, which is when they commune to the spirit world. And so it's fascinating that I don't believe Spielberg knew that. But the same mountain that he shows that he's drawn to was exactly the most important mountain among the Lakota Sioux, which is Bear Lodge. It's in us. We can't escape it.
That's what it seems like. It seems like it's always going to be in our DNA. It seems like it's in our DNA. Is it in our DNA? I mean, that's probably what the question is, right?
Every podcast I've given, every presentation I've given, people have asked that same question. I'm going to make a compilation of everybody. Is it in our DNA? Is it in our DNA? And what you're really asking is the most important question of all time. How do we pass on consciousness?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's really what you're asking. And so do we pass on consciousness from the mother to the child? Is consciousness somehow in the cloud? Is consciousness carried through the DNA? Or does consciousness somehow exist and we tap into it? That's really the fundamental question. And this is how I see it, okay? Because I've actually pondered, since I've had a few years ahead of everybody else in this project, I've pondered it. And this is what I've pondered. I live in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, near the Oregon Zoo. And we've got a lion tank of sorts. And the older male is always at the top of the rocks. The females are in the middle, and there's a young female at the bottom. Now, these lions have been fed. So in the real world, the females go out to hunt, and the big lion top protects the territory. He's also protecting the young, because if another male lion comes in and challenges him and takes over, he will kill the young lions. Okay, so he's protecting the whole, everything. But this is of no relevance in this lion tank at the Oregon Zoo, because there's no challengers and they're fed, but they still do the same thing.
They still follow the same pattern.
They have the exact same pattern, and you'd really think if they'd be just all muddling around, trying to scare the visitors and so on. But they don't do that. No. They keep those hierarchical characters. Well, we can actually look at these. We can look at the three of them. Well, he is the dominant male. He has, his job, he has psychologically warded off all the other males, including that young male that's on the bottom, right? Yeah. So he's warded him off. So you can either look at him as the patriarch, the strong male who protects the family, but you could also look at him as the bully.
Yeah, in a way.
And really, and that's really what, I grew up on the East Coast, and I encountered mafia types, okay? And mafia families, and people say, they're just great family men, and well, yeah, he was, but he's also a bully. Yeah. And he did nasty things, and there's a redheaded orangutan out there that has that same. People say, well, he's such a great family man, right? But other people say, the guy's a freaking bully. Yeah. And so anyway, going back to we have this dominant character at the top. Then we have these matriarchal characters in the middle, probably their own spats among themselves. But they are the mothering types. So we're going back to these same archetypal characters within ourselves. And then we have this juvenile at the bottom who really doesn't know where he fits in, other than he can't climb up the rocks because the women are going to push him down, and the old man's going to yell at him, growl at him. Right. And he hasn't become the Lion King, and maybe he someday will. Yeah. So what we're finding is the introvert, the extrovert, the feeler, the thinker. We're finding the bully. We're finding the matriarchal characters. We're finding all these characters in the lions, and the same lions that same psychology of lions is also within us. So how I would put it is that going back to this collective unconscious, and consciousness itself is that we somehow pass it on from one generation to the next, and that we carry the symbols and we carry the archetypes, and when the archetypes and symbols are encountered, the story is evoked. Just as I just expressed that story of the lions at the Oregon Zoo. And does it pass on throughout DNA? Well, if people have a so-called psychological disorder, okay,
Right.
which I don't believe, it could come from either the mother or the father, because some things are hereditary. Therefore, psychological conditions can be passed from either the mother or the father. Okay, so does the so we one could say that introvert, extrovert, think or feel, and so on are also passed through the parents. So does it pass through the DNA per se? I don't know. But we're not pulling these down from the clouds, because we do have psychological conditions that pass from the parents. And I would put these same psychological conditions on par with these archetypal characters that are within us.
Yeah, it makes sense. You know what? It really makes sense, because I was thinking of a situation earlier today, because I've been thinking about this nonstop. Okay, when I was a kid, my mom and dad, they broke up when I was 7, and for many years I did not see my father. But as I got older and I became a man, I always had a fear of being enclosed, like in a small space. For some reason, I don't know why. I never was enclosed in a small space or put in a closet or anything like that. But I always had that, I don't know, weird feeling. Anyways, long story short, many years after, I reconnected with my father, and we were talking about some situation, and he's like, yeah, I have a real bad fear of small spaces. I was like, holy shit. I was like, why would you have that same fear that I have? And that's, why would I get that all of a sudden? And now I hear from you that you have that same thing. So obviously that must have come, through some kind of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, DNA. I don't know. I'm not here to answer the question, but it came through somehow, because there's no reason for me to have that same phobia or fear for a person that I haven't even been around to even been maybe even conditioned to have that same fear. You know what I'm saying?
The conditions, these psychological conditions are passed from the parents. They're not pulled from the cloud.
Right.
Because if they're pulled, because there's too much commonality between what parents have and what their kids have.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
And it's not just whether you have brown or blue eyes or whatever it is. Because there's so many things you can identify parents and kids by usually staying next to each other, or not even if they're across the room. Oh my God, you look just like your daughter or whatever. And so we pass these down. Are they passed down through our DNA? Can't say, but we can say that we've been passing down these same archetypal characters and symbols that we can recognize today from at least 34,000 years ago. And I'm going back to 300,000 years ago in the book. But we haven't really changed that much. We haven't really become much smarter. We just think we're smarter. The Greeks, until the Greeks saw these images, they probably thought they were pretty smart too.
So they pooped themselves at that point.
and they just had a. So they said, well, there was some ancient civilization of the gods, and they displeased the gods, and they were destroyed by an earthquake, and of course, our army as well, put the final, axe in them, and that's of course the story of Atlantis.
Right.
So I threw a bone at you. You missed it. I grew up in the East Coast, and I had encounters with mafia types.
Yeah.
You missed that one.
No, but
boy,
listen,
you didn't ask me.
I did. I wanted to go down that path, and first thing I thought of was The Godfather. I was like, oh shit, this is the story of The Godfather.
Well, I'm gonna tell you the story. It's a 2-minute story. Please. You're gonna love it.
I want to hear this.
Okay, so I grew up in the East Coast. I grew up Catholic, and when I was probably about 15 or 16, my uncle Bobby picks me up one morning for a job. And he says, you can't tell your parents about the job. There's 2 rules. You can't tell your parents, and don't ask any questions.
Red flag number one.
Okay. And we went, it was a Gambino house.
Oh, okay.
We're talking like, this isn't like peripheral people said they were the mob. These are the people who actually went to jail for being mobsters.
Right,
Okay?
yeah.
And my uncle was a landscape he was a landscape architect, and he did a lot of marble work. So he had me handle the concrete. You know, so I did the concrete work on a mafia job. Okay, and there's a few things that I know I remember about.
Shoes? You make any shoes by chance or no?
Yeah, exactly. There's a few things I remember about because it was like I'm like 15 and I hadn't seen Playboy before, so I went in the bathroom. Maybe I was 14 and the Playboy there was a stack of Playboys right next to the toilet.
Hey.
And so it must have been like a mob thing. You know, you're not in unless you have a stack of Playboys.
Yeah, forget about it.
And and the other thing, of course, that everything's marble.
Yeah.
And my uncle specialized in that. And my uncle liked work with the mafia types because it was all a cash deal. And so until this interview tonight, I have not put it out there that I have a mafia connection, that everybody that was involved is now deceased, or long put away.
There you go.
And I can now, break the code of silence that my uncle put me to.
Your secret is safe with us.
Okay.
Bernie, man, listen, this has been an absolutely huge treat, man. And please, we're running a little bit out of time here. Please tell everybody where they can find all your information, your books and everything, man, because I really want to push this information out there. I believe it's a real important piece of the puzzle that, listen, you should be on the History Channel with the messed up hairdo, not that guy talking about ancient aliens. This makes more sense. This makes
It'll all come. It takes time. It takes time.
I understand. But it makes sense. But please tell everybody.
The book is on Amazon and every place you can find an ebook. Before Orion, Find the Face of the Hero. BeforeOrion.com is my webpage. There's lots of videos and connections you can make from there, including Twitter and so on. I use Before Orion for everything. So Instagram, Pinterest, and Facebook. Follow me, watch the videos. There's so much information out there that just have fun with it and learn about yourself.
Yeah, that's the important part. And Bernie, what do you have coming up in the future, man? I mean, you're a very interesting guy. You've come up with this very interesting premise. Makes perfect sense to me. I don't understand how anybody else couldn't put this together, but you did, and I'm glad you did. What else do you have in the horizon coming up?
Well, I love doing podcasts and giving presentations. I give presentations at universities as well, and to groups. What I would like to do down the road is to write a documentary, as you were drawing to. So I'm reaching out there looking for people who do this sort of thing, and it could be Discovery Channel, History Channel, could be Netflix. So I'm putting out feelers to find the right producer director who's ready to take on the greatest story ever told.
You hear that, Netflix? Bernie Taylor is knocking on your door with this fantastic story, and I think it makes perfect sense. I thank you so much, Bernie, for coming on the podcast, and we're gonna have you back on.
Let's do it.
Yeah, please, and talk some more and have you on our podcast. So listen, thanks again. Again, you can find all his work at BeforeOrion.com. You can get the book there. I encourage everybody to go take a look at that and pick that up. A lot of photos, a lot of illustrations, which I love, and I think that you guys will enjoy it as well. Thank you, Bernie, so much for coming on the podcast.
Let's do it again. Thank you.
Very good. Have a good night. Well, there you have it. That's our interview with Bernie Taylor, and what a great guest, man. I mean, what a wonderful book that he has, coming out, or he has out already, and just a great, just a compilation of different pictures and stories. Just the illustrations alone it's just worth it. Again, you can find that at BeforeOrion.com. That's again BeforeOrion.com. That's the website for everything there, and you can find all of his information, such as Before Orion and a couple other books that he's written in the past as well. So I recommend those as well. So again, I'm Will Martinez for Dark Fringe Radio. You can catch us every week here on either iTunes, SoundCloud, and also Google Play, also Player FM. Just look up Dark Fringe Radio, and we'll be there. Just check us out every week. Make sure to give us a subscribe and a liking, and we appreciate it very much. Again, if you want to send any information to us via email, if you have any suggestions for a host or guest or any idea whatsoever for an episode of the podcast, you can send that to thedarkfringe@gmail.com. Again, that's thedarkfringe@gmail.com. So again, I am your host, Will Martinez. Hope you guys enjoyed that interview tonight with Bernie Taylor. We'll catch you again next week, and have a good night.